All right, everybody, let's please grab a seat. We're going to kick this off. Okay, thanks, everybody. For those of you that I have not met yet, I'm TJ Whalen. I'm one of the VOBA board members, and my day job is with Fresh Tracks Capital, financing emerging Vermont-based businesses. I've got a couple of announcement type things. The first is that the votes cast by VOBA members this morning have been counted. And congratulations, the board of directors who were on the 2023 slate have been reelected. Give them a round of applause. And on behalf of the board, we're excited about VOBA's direction for the year ahead and excited to be working with all of you. So don't hesitate to let us know if you have thoughts or questions or ideas on how we can help. The bigger part of what I'm here to say is to introduce Mike Pieciak, Vermont's 31st state treasurer. And during Mike's term, which began earlier this year, Mike's focused on, and I think delivered on, economic and financial equity for everyone in our brave little state. Mike championed the passage of a program called Vermont Saves, which is basically a retirement program for those that lack access to an employer-sponsored plan. He's made development of new housing a key priority, and we all know that the shortage of housing has been a real limitation on Vermont's outdoor economy and the state's overall economic progress. And recently, Mike led an effort to bring together representatives from the state's climate, energy, and outdoor recreation sectors. Thank you, Drew, for being there, to showcase Vermont's growing economic strength and resiliency, which led to the rating agencies supporting our strong credit ratings, which helps boost demand for the state's bonds, which in turn helps create more housing and more jobs. So thank you, Mike. And before becoming treasurer, Mike served as our commissioner of the Department of Financial Regulation. And of course, we all probably all saw Mike's great work on the governor's pandemic task force, where he did all the data modeling and provided regular updates that helped steer us all through a pretty tricky time. Before his public service, Mike practiced law in New York and here in Vermont with DRM. Mike is also a native Vermonter and loves the outdoors. And we're all fortunate to have him back here giving so much to Vermont and being such a great champion for Vermont's outdoor economy. So please help me welcome Mike Pieciak.
I think we're good, and we're all mic'd up and everything. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, TJ. Thank you very much to Kelly for the invitation to be here with you all today. I'm really excited about that and excited to talk a little bit about, what we view as the opportunities in the Vermont economy over the next decade or two, and particularly as they interconnect with the outdoor recreation economy. But as TJ mentioned, and as Drew participated in, one of the things that the treasurer has to do, one of the great responsibilities, is working with the rating agencies and trying to make sure we strengthen and improve our rating from them so that we have the lowest interest rates we possibly can have on our bonds, to make sure our bonds are more attractive, more competitive when we put them out for things like infrastructural improvements, housing improvements, important state projects, that we have the lowest possible rate for Vermont taxpayers so that we can do more with the same amount of money. We can invest more into Vermont. And we have a very limited amount of time with these rating agencies. They haven't visited Vermont since 2015. Part of it was the pandemic, some delay in them getting back up to Vermont. But as we put together the day, we knew that we had to focus on Vermont's outdoor recreation economy as a key piece of the conversation. We knew that the percent of the Vermont GDP has grown for outdoor recreation up to 4.1%, I think it is now, third most in the country. We knew that the Vermont outdoor recreation industry supports thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs across our state. And I'm sure, as the governor made this point earlier today, they support the jobs often in our more rural areas of the state that have less economic activity going on from other sources. So that was a critical point to make with the rating agencies as well. And we really appreciated Drew's participation in the discussion about how that is a very fast-growing segment for us, about how that segment is not just supporting the businesses that are in the room, but there are a lot of businesses that decide to move to Vermont or stay in Vermont because they themselves are the owner of the business, or because of their workforce demands to have outdoor recreational opportunities and activities. That's become a greater and greater importance to the underlying economic vibrancy of Vermont as well. And I think it was interesting when we asked the folks, the individual people that came up from the rating agencies, had they been to Vermont before? And they would say yes to go skiing, or yes to, spend a vacation outdoors, basically. So they themselves, their relationship with Vermont, even though they work with Vermont in a professional standpoint, was through our outdoor recreation economy. So I think it was a good tie-in to hear that from them. And then, as TJ mentioned, they either, in our discussions offhand or in their reports as well, were really impressed by what they were seeing in Vermont, about the focus on outdoor recreation as a key component of the future of the Vermont economy. And I can get into that in a minute. But Moody's in particular cited that in their bond rating report, saying that Vermont's outdoor recreation and natural beauty is a key economic asset for the state. So they clearly recognize that. And again, as TJ said, affirmed our bond rating, which is the second highest status you can have, AA+. And we're working to get back to AAA. And I know with the success of the outdoor recreation industry, we'll get there, no doubt, in the coming years. And the other thing I just wanted to mention as a bit of thanks, thanks obviously for participating in that important progress and important process. But I also want to thank the industry for its work during, immediately after, and now following the COVID-19 pandemic. We had great success in Vermont from a standpoint of keeping cases low and keeping hospitalizations low and keeping death low. But at the same time, not just in Vermont, but across the country, it had a profound impact on our economy. Businesses were forced to close. Economic activity, even if they weren't forced to close, was dramatically reduced. But the bright spot in our economy, and continues to be the bright spot in our economy, was the outdoor recreation sector. People could do that safely. They could be outside with their friends and with their families. I think Vermonters and people outside of Vermont as well found a new appreciation and a new connection to Vermont, its natural beauty, its outdoor opportunities. And we're seeing that in outdoor recreation being one of the fastest growing industries in our state. So I really think you played a key role in keeping the state on its feet during the COVID-19 pandemic from an economic standpoint. And you continue to be the foundation of what will be, I think, a very optimistic future for the state of Vermont. So just want to thank everyone in the room for your work in doing that and supporting the Vermont economy. But as I think about, outdoor recreation, I really think of it as the Vermont advantage, right? When you think about what is something that makes Vermont unique relative to our peer states across New England or across the country, at the core of that is our natural beauty and our outdoor recreational opportunities. I see everything else sort of focusing around that fundamental advantage that we have in our state. When you think about the importance of our GDP broadly, obviously outdoor rec is a significant portion of that, but broadly tourism is one of the biggest components of our GDP, supporting and establishing more relationships as it relates to tourism, attracting more people to come and see Vermont, who will potentially then turn into Vermonters. That is a critical thing for our economy now and will be a critical thing for our economic future and vibrancy in the future. And I think that the individuals in the outdoor rec industry play a key role as being key ambassadors to Vermont in that regard. And you think about our demographic challenges, another issue that we've been trying to really focus on and make progress on. And I think we're starting to see some benefits of that coming out of the pandemic. We're starting to see some changes in our demographics. But that's been a real challenge for us as our demographics. We've had a struggle with a workforce. We've had a struggle with an aging population. getting older, not attracting the same number of young people to stay here in Vermont, not having the same number of children in school because we haven't had the same number of births in the state for quite a long time. So we really need to solve this demographic issue by attracting more people into our state. We won't make up for it simply from the amount of births that we're going to have in the state and the number of Vermonters that we're going to create that way. We need to attract people to our state. And there was a survey that we conducted back when I was the commissioner at the Department of Financial Regulation that was looking at, you remember that $10,000 program for people to move into Vermont? And we surveyed the respondents, the people that got that grant and moved to Vermont. And we asked them, what was the reason for you to move to Vermont? And the top reason for 72% of them was Vermont's outdoor recreation environment. And these are people that we gave $10,000 to potentially. And they still cited by far the natural beauty and the outdoor recreation as the reason that they wanted to come to Vermont. And I think that's emblematic of a much broader interest among individuals thinking about Vermont. They've had an opportunity to have tourism here. I think that's how that connects to our demographics. They've grown up here. They went to school here. They have a friend or a family member that's vacationed in Vermont. They've had a good experience. They talk about how accessible it is to being outdoors. And that starts to catch on and starts to have some momentum. When you look at the IRS data from the years 2000 and 2021, the most recent data that's available, Vermont saw 6,000 people move into the state, a net 6,000 new taxpayers into the state. And then you drill down on that a little bit more, and of those 6,000 people, about 84% of them were between the ages of 26 and 44. So the exact kind of demographics that we want to see in Vermont, young people that are going to have young families, that are going to have their professional careers in Vermont for the next couple of decades and make an impact both economically and in a whole variety of community ways as well. So that's really critical. And you look at the U.S. Census data as well. That's another source of sort of getting a gauge on what's happening with our population. And there, in the most recent data set that became available last month, again, about 3,000 people they showed had moved into Vermont. So kind of reinforcing that IRS data that we're seeing positive inbound migration from other states. Again, a key thing for us if we're going to be competitive into the future. And you look at that data and you parse it out a little bit and you see, well, where are people moving to and where are they moving from? And for the most part, people that are moving into Vermont are coming from the Northeast. They're coming from New England. They're coming from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all the places around us. They probably had opportunity to visit Vermont regularly, and now they're deciding to make Vermont home. But the other thing that I think is interesting is when you look at it from a net basis, where are people moving to and then where are they moving from? On a net basis, there are a couple of states that make sense. Florida and South Carolina, there were more people moving to those states than coming from those states to Vermont. And you can think about people retiring and moving down to South Carolina or to Florida. But the other two states that were in the top 10 in terms of loss to Vermont, so these are people moving away from Vermont, and we haven't gained as many people back from that particular state, were Colorado and Utah. And you think, well, why are they moving to Colorado and Utah? I mean, a pretty simple reason for that, I would think. And on a total basis, it was about 1,500 people that we lost to those two states in terms of how many people from those states moved to us. So again, I think it's just a valuable data point about how important it is to think about outdoor recreation as an attraction tool and as a retention tool for people that are growing up in Vermont, currently living in Vermont, or thinking about moving to our state as well. So those are the first 2 points, that sort of tourism and those demographics. And I think the other 2 points that are really important to think about are just the broader economic implications and then the thought about community. And on the broader economic implications, our outdoor recreation industry has played a critical role in our economy broadly for quite some time. You can hear about the stories about Thomas Watson, skiing at Stowe and thinking about wanting to put an IBM factory in the state of Vermont. And that did materialize. And as it was reported in the Stowe Reporter, potentially it was a tax write-off for his ski vacations. And whether that was true or not, they did not have a definitive statement on the news report. But certainly I think they also noted that Vermont was one of the most highly visited IBM factories in the country for senior leadership. So there may have been some connection, but the founder of AIG, C.V. Starr, also strong connection to Vermont and the outdoor recreation economy. And you talk to people now, you talk to many businesses that are here in Hula, and you talk to the venture capital funds that are supporting them. And you say, well, why did you start your business here? And one of the reasons they'll cite is this beautiful facility and the community that exists in Vermont. But very quickly they get to outdoor recreation. We wanted to live here as founders of our company. Our employees that work for us want to work in a place where they have immediate outdoor access. The values of Vermont are the same values that they share as an organization and as a corporation. And that will bode well for us in the decades to come, no doubt. We need to continue to tap into that and understand that by growing our outdoor recreation economy, it's not just benefiting that industry, but it's having much broader economic impacts as well. And then I see the last sort of core piece of it is our community. I think outdoor recreation brings people together, both into Vermont and also into community and relationship with each other. At a time in our country's history where there's an epidemic in loneliness, I think outdoor recreation can play a key role in bringing people together, establishing new interpersonal, individual relationships with each other, with groups, and a relationship with the natural beauty and the physicality of a state like Vermont. I think that's a very critical role, and particularly in this time, again, in our country's history. And in that community spirit and in that economic spirit, I think it's really important to think also about the businesses that are here supporting our outdoor recreation industry. Your local businesses, for the most part, your businesses that support local individuals, the money that is spent either by Vermonters or by tourists that go to your businesses, cycle back through our economy here in Vermont. So again, when we think about community, I think it's really important to think that people are able to get together and build those relationships, but you're also supporting individual businesses that are really foundational to the Vermont economy of the future. Businesses that are local, businesses that have sustainability practices, businesses that care about the places where they're working and doing business. And those are all the things that your organization represents. And I just want to also mention, again, the importance, I think, that groups like yours play in Vermont's future. I think you are critical ambassadors to Vermont. You're critical ambassadors for people that don't yet live here, people that are coming to Vermont and experiencing Vermont maybe for the first time, or maybe it's their 20th family vacation. But your businesses, the way they interact with you, the way they interact with Vermont, are what makes a lasting impression for them when they go home and talk to their friends and family about the experiences that they had in the state. And I also think you're the ambassadors for Vermont's natural outdoor beauty as well, for those that are here in Vermont. And you've done a really great job on that, making Vermont accessible to all Vermonters, the outdoors accessible to all Vermonters. When you think about making the outdoors accessible to people with all ability levels, people in the BIPOC community, people in the LGBTQ plus community, it's great that your organization in particular has made that an emphasis, because we need to make sure that Vermont and our outdoors are accessible to all. And in particularly, when you think about the BIPOC community, that's our fastest growing demographic in Vermont. Now, we had a very low base to start from. We have to obviously get more diverse in our state, and that's going to be critical to attracting more people to come to Vermont. But we have to make sure that we are open and accessible to them in all the ways that we can be, including with the connection to Vermont's natural, beautiful landscape. So I applaud you for your efforts and your work on that as being ambassadors for our state. So a couple of the challenges that I think we need to overcome here over the next decade, as we think about how can Vermont be a very vital and vibrant and sustainable place to live and to work. You probably heard it earlier from the governor, but I would put housing as the number one issue that's facing our state. And I say that now at this current moment in time, but I also say that as sort of a decade-long problem that we're going to have to work on and think about. So we're not going to solve it overnight. Why I say it's a problem now is partly because of those demographic issues I mentioned, right? 6,000 more people moving to Vermont. I mentioned that those 6,000 people were younger. They're also much wealthier too. On average, they're making about 74% of them are making over $100,000 a year. About 50% of them are making over $200,000 a year. They brought about $850 million of additional adjusted gross income into the state when they moved into Vermont. And there's some really good things that come with that. We saw our personal income tax numbers go up substantially throughout the pandemic. So maybe 5 or 6 fiscal years ago, we were bringing in maybe $750 million in personal income tax. And now it's $1.2 billion, and it's been pretty steady at that $1.2 billion. So $400, $500 million more, not because we raised taxes, but because more people moved to Vermont and people with more means moved to Vermont as well. So that means government has more resources and means we have more opportunities to fix some of the problems that we're facing. But it obviously put a significant crunch on our housing situation in the state. People moved into Vermont, paid in cash, paid over the asking price, and then ended up largely working remotely. So they took a house off of the market without adding a job to the local workforce, which put even more pressure on those of us that earn our living from Vermont specifically in terms of trying to afford housing. So that's, I think, the specific crunch that we're facing now. But the thing that's going to be a continued challenge over the next decade to 15 years is when we look at our workforce and we see that 100,000 people in our workforce are over the age of 55 years old. So 100,000 people in our workforce, which makes up about 300 or 325,000 people, about 1/3 of them are over the age of 55. And that's, disproportionately high compared to other places. So as those individuals get closer to 60, 65, 70, and they start to retire, and retire in big numbers, they're a big portion of our workforce. Some will leave Vermont, but a lot of them will not leave Vermont for many of the reasons we all want to live here. And they're going to retire in our state. So it's going to be another pressure point. We're going to have people leaving the workforce, but not necessarily having a home being freed up for somebody to take that job or take that home to be able to add to our local workforce. So it's going to require us to build more housing over the next decade to 15 years to keep up with that growing retirement trend. One of the things we did in our office, TJ mentioned it, is a focus on housing. And we thought it was the most impactful thing that we could do at the current moment. So the state of Vermont, as a result of having all those new residents and having more money in our coffers and everything like that, we have about $2 billion in our state checking account. That number used to be like 200 million or 300 million. And it's grown exponentially during the pandemic and after the pandemic to $2 billion. So we expanded this program called the 10% in Vermont program. It allows us to make local investments in Vermont for economic development and job creation. And we decided to expand that up to an additional $85 million of capacity in the state and to focus specifically a couple of other areas too, but prioritize housing as our number one concern. So we were able to make low interest rate loans to organizations like the Vermont Economic Development Authority, the Northern Forest Center, the Vermont Housing and Finance Agency, so that they could turn around and put $55.5 million into housing projects that basically became non-viable as a result of rising interest rates over the last 3 or 4 years. So we expect that $55.5 million investment to bring in about another $340 million in private and public capital to support about 1,100 new homes in Vermont over the next 3 to 4 years. So we think that's a substantial investment, but we have to continue to think how we can make those kind of investments that are smart and support our housing industry. I think we also need to think about where are we building and how are we building. We want to be able to build in a way that preserves our natural landscape. I think it was Act 59 that called for 30% of Vermont to be conserved by 2030 and then 50% potentially by 2050. And I think that's critical if we're going to maintain the kind of environment that we need here in Vermont. But for those areas that aren't conserved, that's where we really need to think about smart growth, building with infrastructure where infrastructure exists, building more infrastructure, building higher, building bigger in a sense to be able to preserve our natural environment and also have places for people to live and support our economy. And that's a big change for Vermont. I know I grew up in Brattleboro, and I think our tallest building was 7 stories, maybe it was 6. And it's a pretty big one for Brattleboro. And, and you can go to every town in Vermont and you're not going to find buildings that are more than 3 or 4 stories tall. So it would be a big change, but it's the way that we can support workers and individuals affording to live in Vermont while also preserving our most critical resource, again, that I see sits at that center of our economic opportunity over the next decade to 2 decades. Another challenge, obviously, that we're going to have to deal with is climate change. We know that Vermont needs to get more resilient. We know we need to adapt better to the changing climate, that we're going to see Vermont's climate be warmer and wetter. It's going to put at risk things like all of these iconic industries we've had over our most recent history, from skiing to agriculture to maple sugaring to fall foliage. All of those things can be impacted by our weather getting warmer and wetter. And then, of course, we saw the devastating impacts from the July flooding in this past summer across Vermont. So there are some, I think, some highlights there and some things that we're doing right. You can see from Hurricane Irene to this 2023 flooding, although there were places that were hit with even more water in this most recent storm, the number of roads that were impacted, the number of state roads, was about half as Irene, because there was so much thoughtfulness over the last decade about building back in a resilient way. The number of culverts that were damaged or impacted, again, was just about half as less as there was after Irene. We did not see nearly the same number of state bridges that were impacted. About 34 were destroyed or significantly impacted after Irene. It was just a handful, like 3 or 4 after the July flooding. But still, we saw Montpelier and Barrie and Ludlow and Londonderry and other places, Johnson, Hardwick, downtown areas get significantly impacted by severe rainfall. So that's going to be one of our most pressing challenges as well, is trying to figure out better ways to adapt and to mitigate those impacts. And we're doing work on that in the Treasurer's office as well. We have some work. Carrie Dolan is here as well. That's been a big advocate for financing solutions for green energy infrastructure and climate infrastructure. And we'll have a report to the legislature in a couple of months with some suggestions on that. And then the last thing I just want to mention, because there's so many businesses here in the room, it's something that TJ hit upon, which was this program called Vermont Saves. And it's something that we're really excited about, because there are in Vermont about 88,000 to 100,000 people that don't have access to any retirement through their employer currently. And the data will suggest that if you don't have access to retirement, then you just don't save for retirement. Like 95% of people that don't have a workplace retirement plan don't save anything for their future retirement. It puts pressure on those individuals, puts pressure on the communities, puts pressure on the state budget when people are retiring basically into poverty and not able to sustain the same kind of living and the same kind of economic personal vitality that they had during their working career. So Vermont Saves is a program that will require small businesses that don't offer a retirement plan to sign up for Vermont Saves at no cost to the business. It's just that they have to participate and sign up their employees. And then their employees will be automatically enrolled into a Roth IRA. There'll be automatic payroll deductions if the employee does not opt out of the program, which they certainly can do. And then that money will be invested automatically for them unless they make certain investment choices on their own. So it's a program that's designed to encourage people to make the right financial choices. They always have an opportunity to opt out of the program. They always have the opportunity under the Roth IRA to get their principal money back if they have an emergency. But we view that as a really important economic and also sort of personal financial empowerment tool. And the reason I'm mentioning it here is because we are in the process of operationalizing that program and standing it up. We hope to have a pilot project underway within the next year or so. We have a deadline to stand the program up by July of 2025, which I'm very confident we'll be able to do. But we're looking for industry partners, sort of early adopters that can be a champion of this program, that can understand the benefit that will come from being a small business that now can offer a retirement program free of cost, that understands the benefit of attracting and retaining talent by being able to do that. And I think I recognize that this would be a tremendous industry to be able to partner with as an early adopter as we roll that program out. So I would encourage you to think about that, and we'll work with Kelly and with your board of directors on that. But I wanted to put that plug in while I was here. So TJ, I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have, if that's allowable.
Why not?
Yeah, Nick.
Just curious, in your conversations with the rating agencies, to what extent did they press on climate resiliency in the outdoors? You can imagine natural resource question coming up and how that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Nick, because they are struggling with something that's happening nationally, which is that some states are recognizing the impacts of climate change and some states are not. And they're a rating agency and they have to rate all of the states, in a way that's uniform. So they're really kind of in a challenge, but they do recognize the need for states to be thinking about climate resiliency and mitigation. Because if you're not, it's like an unfunded liability. It's going to happen. And if you don't prevent it, or if you haven't figured out ways to be able to sort of get ahead of it and make those investments, or to have money set aside to respond to it, then it's going to be a liability that impacts you eventually, for some states more than others. So I think they look at it from just sort of a standpoint of like, how is climate going to impact your state? Like in Vermont, it's warmer and wetter. For Vermont, it's more severe rainfall. For other places, it might be much more challenging, like, fire and rising seawater and hurricanes and more severe storms. So they look at that. I think they look at how are you responding to it? Do you recognize it as a challenge? And then what are you specifically doing to respond to it? So one of the things that was a big topic of our one-on-one meetings, because we met with them in early August, was the July flooding that had just happened in July. So it's high on their radar. They have a challenge to try to have a uniform approach to that across the country. But it's something I think that we earn points for in Vermont for our focus on it and our understanding of the need to respond to it.
Question related to healthcare. Thank you. Hello. Healthcare. I believe going forward, it's going to be one of the biggest challenges. I think it already is a big challenge, but I think it's going to be one of the biggest threats to small business across the country. But what I know is here in Vermont, where my family of four, we spend $31,000 on premiums for the privilege of a $6,000 or $7,000 deductible on top of that. I feel like a bit of a canary in the coal mine right now, because many of those costs are still picked up by employers, and folks don't really have a true understanding of what it costs.
Right. At the individual level.
Exactly. Yeah. How do you see that playing out over time?
Yeah. Well, so my previous role at the Department of Financial Regulation, we regulated the insurance industry. So we regulated the health insurance industry. So we spent a lot of time thinking about healthcare, and there were certain things that we could do, I think, to support the market. Like there was this fact that we were merged as a exchange state, and we unmerged to bring greater subsidization to individuals and provide relief to businesses. But that was sort of a one-time thing. I think the challenge on the healthcare side is that there's so much that is sort of outside of the state of Vermont's control. Like 25% are on Medicaid, 25% are on Medicare. Medicaid is a state-run program, but there's still parameters around that. And then Medicare rather, is not at all. So you only have about 50% of Vermonters in some form of commercial insurance. And even then, a lot of those commercial insurance plans are exempt from state regulation. They're regulated at the federal level. So I think that's one of our big challenges, is that we can get at some of that, but we can't nearly get at all of the challenge. The other one is pharmaceutical costs. It's one of the biggest drivers of healthcare increases is pharmaceutical costs. And that's something that a state doesn't really have a direct role in. We could think about things like buying at bulk or trying to improve benefits from that perspective, but you really need responses at the federal level to those. The other thing that's driving healthcare costs is traveling nurses. And traveling nurses ties back to housing, right? That hospitals are not able to find enough housing in Vermont, and nurses are having a hard time affording to be able to live here, not as a traveling nurse. And then they go into that, and sometimes they're going from Rutland to Burlington. They're not even leaving the state. But the cost to pay for traveling nurses, which is really critical because we need to have access, ties back to housing. So we're limited. I think there's some things we can do. I think there's some regulatory reforms we could do at the state level. I think a focus, again, on housing for those critical occupations will be important for long term as well.
Seems like how you pay for it is another issue.
Yeah, right.
Where I think I read it about 30% of what is spent on healthcare goes to administration.
Right.
The doctor holding the scalpel, or the nurse drawing the blood. It goes to the insurance company.
Yeah.
And then the infrastructure that has to be put in place to deal with the insurance company. Is there anything that can be done in that regard, do you think, going forward?
So I think it'd have to be, we've tried to do something like that in Vermont, and I think we found that it had to be more regional or national.
Yeah.
I will say, though, for the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, when we regulated them, their administrative expense was usually in like the 6% range. Like they were really good, and they would win national awards among the Blues plans for like how low their administrative costs were relative to their peers. So I think some of our big players in that space have already been doing a lot of the work, but it comes down to those pharmaceutical costs. And also it comes down to just certain individuals that have really expensive healthcare needs. Those are the two things in Vermont that really have been driving costs up.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay.
Well, thanks, TJ.
Thank you. For your service to Vermont.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much.
In debt to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, now we've got Lisa Lynn coming up, who will MC the Trailblazer Award.